Hey, my buddy, my brother, my mate, Matthias Starnick here in the house. And who did I bring today for lessons with the master? I brought another old-timer, a tough guy. The guy is really good, man. Listen to the guy's sound. And I said I brought another old-timer, but in a good way, man. Because these guys laid the foundations of music. John Scofield, a great guitarist with whom I personally have a love-hate relationship. It's not love and hate, because what is love and hate? First you love, then you hate, right? Actually, when I first heard John Scofield in my life, I was 16. I thought the guy was a fraud. A guitar teacher I had in Cabo Frio, named DeMocto Jr., lent me one of his video lessons and said, this guy here, this guy is really good. I listened and said, man, this guy is playing everything wrong. A horrible sound, no tapping, no sweeping. This guy is a fraud. What's going on here? But it's that thing, right? At 16, who was wrong? Guess who was wrong? The old man was right. John Scofield is funny because he became one of my biggest influences, right? Many people even say that they hear a lot of John Scofield's sound in my music. So today I'm going to talk about this guy, which I have such great pleasure in doing. I listened to everything by him. I was obsessed with John Scofield's sound for many years, so it's going to be a very enjoyable lessons with the master to talk about. I chose a live performance I saw by Miguel Zenon, who is an outstanding saxophonist. He studied at Berklee a few years before me. He was already incredible there. And it's funny too, because John Scofield was a Berklee student who graduated in 1973. I couldn't even imagine, I wasn't even born yet, nor was my older brother. In other words, John Scofield was already leaving Berklee to become one of the greatest guitarists in fusion, jazz, groove, funk, blues, meaning he's a guy who mixes everything. That's part of his sound. Yeah, this live session I transcribed is actually somewhat hard to find, but I managed to find it. I'm sharing it here with you all. I've translated it and will comment on it, so let's go all in. And before I forget, who am I? I'm a guitarist. I'm the director of the Starnick Academy of Music, and on this channel we talk about music for musicians. Consider subscribing because there's a lot of good stuff here. Over 500 videos, right? I need to talk a little before the first video. A very strong characteristic of John Scofield is playing laid back. What does that mean? It's the guy who plays behind the beat. You feel like his sound is a bit delayed, but this is intentional, okay, folks? It's not something where the guy is like, oh, he doesn't know how to play in time. No, it's a way for you to groove and have a flavor, right? This flavor of playing a bit behind the beat. In fact, it's a characteristic of neo-soul that people are really enjoying now, but this is nothing new. This brings a characteristic of blues and also gospel, okay? John Scofield has this very present in his sound, so much so that throughout his discography, he has a gigantic discography. 30 albums or more solo albums. And we must highlight here that he played with a master of masters, the jazz icon who was Miles Davis, okay? But then he has an album solely of gospel music, which is actually a more recent album, probably about 12 years old. He has an album more focused on blues, but throughout his career, John Scofield established himself as this jazz fusion guitarist who plays a lot of different things. His jazz is very mixed with rock and blues. I think this is the main point of this lesson with the master here. Him talking about the influences of these styles on his sound. Let's watch the first video now.
When I started with blues in the early 60s, there was this blues craze in America. You know, and it was like all these white suburban kids, like myself, went blues crazy. And I was one of them, you know. And I would go hear B.B. King, the king of the blues, B.B. King. And then Albert came on the scene. So the sound of the blues guitar, it's what the guitar can do. It's an amazing thing. I guess I'm kind of stuck, you know, in between those guys that I love that the guitar could do that. And then jazz.
So you heard and saw him talking about the influence of blues on his sound, the influence of rock, right? John Scofield, he basically grew up playing in the late 1960s, right? When he graduated from Berklee in 1973, he had already gone through his teenage years. He was about 23 or 24 years old. But he even talks about this thing, right, of being a white kid from the suburbs. The American suburb is not like the suburb in Brazil, which is a, let's say, lower region. The suburb there is for those who have a higher purchasing power and don't want to live in the central area. Because in the United States, it's easy to move from a more distant place, live more comfortably with more space, and still be in the center, right? So when he says he's a kid from the suburbs, in theory, he's that white, wealthier kid who was listening to black music, right? That blues. He's talking about how blues and rock influenced him to play jazz. I'm going to show another video of him playing blues. You feel something interesting. He has all those particularities of the blues sound, the bends, the vibratos, right? And he's playing this blues here. You feel that it's a blues in the most basic form, but it has that sophistication. Besides using the expressive tools of rock, right, and blues rock, he brings that aspect of harmonic sophistication, thinking in a mixolydian way. That is, having the 9th tension, 13th tension, which is not a characteristic of traditional blues rock, the blues of Albert King or B.B. King. So what does he take from these guys? It's more about the attitude, the vocal attitude. He mentions this in other parts of the interview that I didn't include here about blues, experimenting and flirting with the voice on the instrument. So the guys who were playing blues, they had this strong intention of making the guitar sound like an extension of the voice. So it's very common, right? In blues, in more rock-oriented blues, to notice that the guy sings and complements with phrases. So that's very B.B. King. So take a look at him playing these blues. It's interesting. Maybe if you're not very familiar with John Scofield, or if you're someone who isn't very familiar with jazz, you'll feel the blues and it's different. It's a blues that has more harmonic sophistication, mainly due to the choice of these scales, such as the use of the mixolydian scale on each of the degrees, instead of just thinking about the minor pentatonic of the first degree. This last part of the video, it's important to point out that Josh Kaufman is a very remarkable guy for having a very unique sound, right? And it's cool to hear Josh Kaufman talking about how he perceived refining his own sound. Miguel Zanin asks him, "Hey man, how did you become this guy with such a strong identity?" And he says something that I found very beautiful, which is putting yourself in a place of vulnerability and not projecting that image of, "Hey man, I'm an amazing guy. I've always been great from the start. I was the prodigy, and everyone was already in awe when I was 12, 13 years old." He talks about this all the time. You'll notice I don't want to give too much away yet. He talks a lot about this aspect, so pay attention to it. Another important point, whenever you research about innovation, I've already brought up literature on this topic here, and a very cool book by Adam Grant called Originals. He talks a lot about what? The person who is innovating, whom people perceive as having brought something to their own style, is very much about having mastery of your style, but bringing in elements from outside. So innovation doesn't come from within the métier, from within the bubble. This doesn't happen only with music, it happens with art, it happens with science. Yes, Nobel Prize winners were usually people who were focused within the métier, but they explored other things, right? The book that talks about this, which I have also mentioned, is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. So take a look at this last part of the video. I'm going to make a comment that I think will be very important for you.
Did you notice the part where he talks about Desviado and Menor are amazing guitar players? George Benson? Man, when you hear George Benson play, he's a machine, right? His fluency. And then he talks about Montgomery. I spent my whole life trying to figure out what he did, about Django. Oh, and he says, these are the real guitar maniacs, and it's like that with all instruments, right? And I started with rock. Well, I love those saxophone musicians like Joe Henderson, who has this break. It's like a blues thing, and I'm trained. So I tried to bring in the rock elements as we talked about before. So in a way that will happen for me. At first, I wasn't as good at copying my, idols as I would have liked to be. Also, I knew that from Jimmy.
The guy is, when you hear Jordy Sup Colorado, he's a machine, his fluency. Then he talks about Jungle and Jim. Anyways, he's different from John Snow Hall. And he says, man, I failed at trying to play like those guys. In fact, the one who talks about this is John Mayer, right? He says that his way of playing today was a frustrated attempt to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix. Then you realize that when you try to copy, but at some point you understand, man, I'm not supposed to literally copy. I'm not supposed to be just like the guy. He understood that. I think that's important. I think it takes the weight off our shoulders. as instrumentalists, as musicians. Why? We need to understand that we are not the same as other people, and that if someone managed to reach a level of excellence, becoming an icon, they got there because they looked inside themselves and discovered their own truth. Every instrumentalist, every artist needs to look inside themselves and realize, man, what makes me different? I'm not talking about how you will sound specifically, but even in the mechanical aspect. Because, man, for example, I can't play like George Benson. I can play more like Josh Kaufman. I identify more, even biologically, with the way of playing, phrasing with Josh Kaufman. If I try to play like George Benson, I get frustrated because I can't achieve that level of clarity, of rhythmic density. And this is something I need to always remember, because when I listen to these guys, what's my tendency? Hey, let me go that way because that way is really good. You can't listen to George Benson and not be impacted. He mentioned Jimmy Hall, and I find Jimmy Hall an interesting guy because he has a medium level of rhythmic density. He's not playing densely all the time, nor is he playing slowly all the time. He manages to balance that. Listen to Jimmy Hall, who does it very well. He also mentions an interesting point about the freedom that jazz provides, right? I made a video talking about why I stopped listening to heavy metal, and it was a funny video because the metal crowd gets angry, but it was a much more educational video, me explaining my journey rather than criticizing the style, right? Everyone listens to what they want. And even today, I sneak in some metal listening, right? But the whole point is that jazz has this beautiful side, which is openness. People who listen to jazz want to be surprised. So you are very welcome when you bring something new. Now, where's the trick in jazz, right? Trick. It's that you need to know the style. You need to bring something from outside and find that balance between what is traditional, what people want to hear, and that touch of innovation, because you won't innovate 100%. These are small elements that you bring in and that really allow you to differentiate your sound. I wanted to know from you, what did you enjoy most about this lesson with Master Josh Kaufman? What was the point that caught your attention the most? And I take this opportunity to ask you, who would you like to see and hear here in our next lessons with the Master? I'm always reading the comments here and taking into consideration who you are requesting, okay? Before you leave, make sure to check out the Steinway Academy of Music. Come study with me with all our content, okay? It's down here in the description. God bless.